Project NIM is a documentary that I knew very little about before going to see it at the cinema. It's basically about a chimpanzee called NIM who was taken from his mother at 2 weeks old by a scientist called Herbert Terrace and was given to several different assistants in order to be raised like a human child. This happened in the early 1970s, and throughout that decade they attempted to teach NIM how to use sign language to communicate with humans. The purpose of the experiment was to see whether or not being raised like a human child can teach him to communicate with humans. So that was basically the overall plot. I think what this documentary does really well is subverting your expectations in a way. Now, I actually found it most interesting, and I must warn you, there could be some possible spoilers here, but it's real life, so can you really have spoilers for real life? Basically, the most interesting aspect of this documentary was the humans involved in the experiment. Now, the scientist, Herbert Terrace, we refer to him as Herb in the documentary, he gave NIM over to quite a large young family who really had no scientific qualifications whatsoever, no animal backgrounds, nobody in the house knew sign language, and he gave NIM to this family in order to raise him as a child and teach him sign language. Now, this family proceeded to develop almost an unhealthy relationship with the chimpanzee and, let him smoke pot and drink alcohol, things like this, and really did no good for him whatsoever. And this is where the film starts to get interesting. It's that you start to get angry when you see this family being interviewed. They really have done no good whatsoever for this chimpanzee, and they haven't, there's no structure to the experiment. They're not keeping a log, they're not keeping details, they have no plan of what they're going to teach the chimp. It really just kind of, it was a half-assed project to begin with. Now, this could be irritating for some people because they're like, well, why are we watching a documentary about a project that even the people involved in couldn't be bothered, to do it properly? Well, what I found really interesting about this is the dynamic between the humans involved. Now, it's clear, although it's never stated, it's clear that Herb was shagging all of his female assistants. Practically everybody involved in this experiment, he probably had a sexual relationship with them. And it's made abundantly clear that this young family, he was having sex with the assistant, the woman who was the head of this family, and she admits it on camera. So I found that quite interesting in how that sexual relationship, affected his decision to give her the chimpanzee. Now, she develops an unhealthy relationship with NIM. She breastfeeds him, which I thought was odd. I understand that he has to be raised like a human child, but to breastfeed a chimpanzee, I don't know, call me old-fashioned, but that seems a bit weird. And you will find that there are many peculiar things that happen to the chimpanzee, and it's all chalked up to the fact that it was the 70s, which is kind of a lazy excuse for the way these people treated this chimp. We then go on to basically this family couldn't cope with him, so NIM's taken to a big mansion out in the countryside where many of Herb's assistants come to help raise and teach NIM. And again, there's many young, good-looking female assistants who he's clearly having sex with, and they openly admit that he did that. I find it fascinating, not the relationship between the chimp and the humans, but the relationships between the humans I found really interesting. And I think what becomes clear is that nobody involved in this project actually liked Herb, the lead scientist. He really had nothing to do with NIM, other than to swoop in and have his picture taken for the local news, and then would swoop off again. And he really seems like the project was so half-assed that the grant that they were given, he must have been spending on himself, because he certainly wasn't spending it on the chimp. Now, problems with this documentary is that it feels all the way through, it feels like it's building to some sort of tragic climax. Now, NIM is a violent chimp. Chimps, by their very nature, are aggressive, violent animals. And basically, over the course of several years, NIM continually bites his caretakers, and basically he bites one woman in the face and nearly rips her face off. And you think, well, this is going to end with either NIM killing someone, or they're having to kill him because he's attacked someone, something like this. But the story just kind of fizzles out, and at the end of it, you're left wondering, why tell us this story if it really doesn't have an ending? You know, I thought that was a downfall, and while I did find the interactions between the humans the most interesting aspect of this, it's also where the film falls down, because everybody involved in this project, or almost everybody, is an absolute bastard. And even if they're presented as good guys, they're still bastards. Like, there's basically everybody just turn the back on NIM and want nothing to do with him, and they abandon him in an animal shelter, and then he gets taken into a medical research facility, and the doctor's basically saying, like, you know, it's not nice, I hate the fact that I have to test medicines on chimps, but it's the law, I have to. If I don't do that, then these medicines won't make it to humans and lives won't be saved. And he actually turns out to be the good guy of the story. There is one hippie bloke who gave Nim pot when he was younger, who basically wants to free Nim. Nim gets taken to a ranch where he's the only chimpanzee. This guy starts hassling the ranch owner because he says it's torture to keep Nim on his own. Doesn't really go into what he did, but it got so bad that the ranch owner had to get a restraining order against this bloke. And it basically, it's a load of bastards wanting to look good in the eyes of the media. That's the impression I got, when none of them could really give two shits about the chimpanzee. And also the chimp himself, I didn't latch on to Nim as I thought I would. I thought I'd really come to sympathise with the chimp, but he seemed to be overly aggressive and demanding, and that's probably the way he was raised by these idiots. But I really didn't care about him whatsoever. I didn't really care about any of the humans. I found it interesting to see them interact, but I didn't care about any of them because they were all bastards, in my opinion. The only guy who comes off looking good in this is the research scientist who tested medical science on Nim when he was in captivity. And while it sounds like how could he possibly be the good guy of the piece, once the medical research facility got shut down, he made it his mission to free all the chimps and give them to this ranch, and he openly admits that I hate the job. You know, but it has to be done. It's an evil that somebody has to do, and I quite understood him and related to him. Everybody else just seemed like you know, hippie stoner idiots who really couldn't give a toss about the chimpanzee in question. So, I mean, for those reasons, it is an interesting documentary, but it doesn't build to a climax. You find yourself fascinated by the types of people involved in the project, but the project itself was so half-arsed, and it was clear that nobody really was interested in completing it. So it really just doesn't amount to anything, and for those reasons, I kind of thought it was a failure. You know, and also these the most interesting aspects of the film, you know, the fact that the lead scientist was having sex with all of his assistants, and you know, this stoner was hassling a ranch owner in order to get Nim back, and it doesn't go into them. It addresses these issues. It says, yes, I was having sex with my assistants, I was hassling this ranch owner, but it doesn't go into more detail, which is what I would have liked. You know, what was this guy doing that made it so bad that the ranch owner had to get a restraining order? You know, that's what I would have been interested to see, but they didn't go that route with it. So all in all, it's an interesting documentary. It's not one of the best I've seen. I like James Marsh. He also did Man on Wire. I liked that film, but I wasn't over keen in this. I didn't like any of the people involved. I didn't like the chimpanzee, and I thought the project was half-arsed, and to be quite honest, it was 90 minutes and it felt about 3 hours long. So it is interesting, don't get me wrong, but it's not revolutionary. It's just kind of a diversion. It really doesn't amount to anything. So I'd recommend seeing it out of curiosity, but don't rush out to see it. So anyway, that's my review of Project NIM.